maybe what we can do is we can just wait like 1 minute and then get started once people join in.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Hi, everybody. For those of you just joining us, thanks for joining in today. We are very excited to be able to host you for our financial aid presentation about the FAFSA and how to pay for college. We're going to get started in just a minute, so hang tight. And if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat, and we will get to those throughout the presentation or at the end. But again, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll get started in just a moment. All right, Pam, so I think whenever you are ready, we can get started.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. You were just hearing from Elise Todderud from the admissions office here at USciences. My name is Pam Ramanathan. I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at USciences. Hoping all of you can hear me. And we're here to explain some things about the financial aid process, explain a little bit about the FAFSA, and a little bit about what results from the FAFSA, from completing it. So here we go. So we will go over all this, and as we're at USciences, we'll use examples of aid at USciences, how we would process based on the FAFSA as an example for everyone. Other schools do things differently, and I will point that out, as we go through. But we're speaking from a point of view of a private four-year college. So every college is a little bit different, but I'll point those differences out as we go. So I don't know how many of you have done a FAFSA in the past, or even before the FAFSA, there was the FAF. I don't know if anyone is as old as I am. They remember the FAF, the financial aid form, was kind of the predecessor to the FAFSA, but it has come a long, long way from that time. So some facts about the FAFSA. It is always free. There are some websites out there. I won't even mention it because I don't want to put it in your head, but where they will offer to do the FAFSA and charge you to do it. So you should never use those websites. There are plenty of FAFSA workshops and presentations hosted at high schools and different colleges. So just remember, it is always free. It has moved. Although the old link fafsa.ed.gov will point you to the new home for the FAFSA, but it has moved. You can get to it from studentaid.gov, and there is a screenshot there. Once you're on studentaid.gov, you would click where you can see apply for aid. There's a drop-down box there, and apply for FAFSA. Both the student and the parent can sign the FAFSA online and need to create a federal student aid ID. You'll see that noted as FSA ID. By creating that online, and it's based on your social security number and your date of birth, you put information in, it's an electronic validation process. You will be able to sign your FAFSA electronically. So a few tips to keep in mind as you're getting ready to complete the FAFSA. If you can use it, a few years ago, well, more than a few now, almost 5 years ago, I think, the FAFSA introduced the use of what's called the data retrieval tool. What that allows you to do is to transfer your income information directly from the IRS to the FAFSA. So you don't actually have to sit there and have your tax returns completed and kind of next to you and look line by line and, okay, what's on line number 56? Let me enter that here in the FAFSA. If you're eligible to do it, you can use the data retrieval tool. What it will do is take you out from the FAFSA directly to the IRS website, and you have to agree to the terms, and it'll let you import information directly from the correct IRS tax filing year into your correct FAFSA. Not everyone is eligible to use that. And like, for example, if you have two parents in the household and they're married but filing separately, you cannot use the data retrieval tool in that case, because you can only transfer one tax return, set of tax return information at a time. Sorry, there's some noise in the background of my house. You make sure to use it. You accurately type your social security number required when you're completing the FAFSA. You'll need to do that for the data retrieval tool as well. But when you're doing the FAFSA, and this just actually happened to me very recently, my son did a FAFSA and I made him do it himself. So I trusted that he knew his social security number, and it turned out he really didn't. So I did not double check behind him, and I let him just do it, and then I did my part and all that. And what happens is the FAFSA is not complete. It will generate an incomplete FAFSA, and it was, even for me, working in financial aid for a long time, I haven't really had a chance to be on the other end of that for a while. So what we had to do is complete a whole new FAFSA because he put his social security number in incorrectly. He had to do another one with the correct social security number, or his other option would have been to make a paper correction and mail it to the central processor. And you don't want to do either of those. So I would definitely recommend having your social security card out, and everything has to match up as it appears on the social security card. And like I mentioned before, you sign your FAFSA online using your FSA ID. You can opt out of that if you don't want to create an FSA ID or you're not comfortable signing it online. You can do that. What you would have to do is submit all the information online, and then you will get a student aid report in the mail, and then you can sign it and mail it in. That does take 6 to 8 weeks to process. So if you're choosing that option, I would plan well ahead of time. But it's quick and easy to sign it right online, and that takes about 5 days for processing. So if for those of you who are high school seniors, the FAFSA is available right now for next year. It opens on October 1st every year for the upcoming school year. If you're a junior and you're on this call, then you cannot do it yet for your freshman year of school. You could do it if you just want to see what happens and what outcomes you get from it, and to get comfortable. If you don't end up attending school anywhere, that FAFSA will just hang out there and disappear after a while because it won't have any enrollment data to match with. But for seniors, you can do it now, and you would be using your 2019 tax information. It seems really early, and it is a lot earlier than it used to be. About 4 years ago, we started having the FAFSA available October 1st instead of January 1st. So if you have an older sibling or older child and you had to wait till January 1st, things have changed. So you're using your 2019 tax information, which would have already been filed hopefully by April 5th, the previous April 15th. So what happens after you complete your FAFSA? You enter in a lot of family information, how many people are in your family, how many people in your family are going to college next year, what your adjusted gross income is, student's income information. It may ask you for asset information. And the next thing that's going to happen is it's going to get processed, like I said, about 5 days. If you sign it electronically, it will generate what's known as an EFC. EFC stands for expected family contribution. It's not necessarily a dollar for dollar in dollar for dollar alignment with what you will actually pay for school, but as I found out when my son's FAFSA was incomplete and I actually got a paper correction form in the mail from them, they worded it as, think of it as an index that schools use to calculate your eligibility for federal student aid. Some schools like USciences, we only require a FAFSA. We don't have any other forms that are required. So we use it to calculate eligibility for our USciences need-based data as well. So I just mentioned some other schools may or may not use that EFC for their own aid calculations. So what are some other aid applications that are out there? Some of you may have heard of the CSS profile form. That's College Scholarship Service. There is a charge for that form, but it does collect a lot more data from families for calculations. It collects some information that the FAFSA does not, particularly about assets and things like that. Many schools do use it. Like I said, USciences does not. Most public institutions would definitely not use a CSS profile either. But that is an option that schools have to use. So I would just suggest to find out when you're applying for financial aid, if you are applying for some schools that require a profile, you have to pay for each school you send your profile to. So make sure you know if all your schools require it, because I wouldn't want you to pay the $15 to send it to USciences, and then we would never receive it. We don't have a method to import it. We wouldn't even look at it. So you want to keep those charges to a minimum. So definitely find out what each school requires and only send a CSS profile to those schools that require it, if that's the situation you're in. Some schools require their own, what they is a very common wording in the financial aid world, institutional application. Institutional meaning that school's application for aid. USciences also, we do not have that, but some schools do. And it's usually to gather some more personal information, what your intentions are, what type of aid you're seeking, and some more detailed information on your income, assets, and family. So one thing that I kind of skipped over, and I'll go back because we only require a FAFSA, but there is one other form. If you are a Pennsylvania resident, the PA State Grant Program is a pretty robust state grant program, and you can use that if you're eligible for it, you can use a PA State Grant at any other school in Pennsylvania. So there is a separate state grant form for that. There will be an indicator on the FAFSA. Do you want us to release your information to your state agency for processing? You would check yes. And then after you submit it, all that FAFSA information will go to FIA, which is our Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. And then you would get an email from FIA that asks just a few more questions about your family status and situation that the FAFSA does not capture, and then submit that to FIA. That is only for Pennsylvania. For other states, you would check with your own state agency and see if they have an application. Every state, all 50 states are different, and all 50 states have different rules about taking their own state grants out of state. So another thing that can be a part of the FAFSA process is verification. I don't know how many people have previously had children or siblings that went to school and were selected for verification. It is about a third of all FAFSAs that are selected for federal verification. What that is they're just sort of randomly selecting some FAFSAs for the schools to double check and make sure that all the information is accurate and as it was reported by the family. It has gone down. The number of FAFSA selected for verification has gone down over the past few years. There is some more logic that is able to evaluate things that maybe don't look right on the FAFSA, or things that are not in alignment with what the computer is expecting. We are seeing fewer and fewer FAFSAs selected for verification. However, we still get them. We get them every year. It is not uncommon. You didn't do anything wrong. So that's a lot of times the first question people ask us. Oh my gosh, I'm selected for verification. Now I have to hand in these documents. What did I do wrong? Nothing. The answer to that is nothing. It just is what it is. I hate that saying, but in this case, it applies. So what does it mean? Students are required to submit some documents to the school, and the school's responsibility to then verify that the actual information you submit matches up with what you put on your FAFSA. So we request copies of tax returns. We have a household size worksheet, and sometimes we have to request some further data like W-2s and things depending. But if you use a data retrieval, we would not ask for tax documents, so that's one more good reason to use that if you are eligible to use it. At USciences, we process your financial aid for prospective students or applicants based on the assumption that that FAFSA information is correct. We do not collect information, verification information from students prior to them committing to attend USciences. That would be a lot of people to submit things, and it's our philosophy that we handle that after the admissions process. We don't want to bog you down in what's already a very hectic time. Some schools do collect verification information prior to processing your estimated financial aid package. So it's another place where different schools do things differently. It's just philosophy of the institution. So let's go. What is a C flag? So this is another thing that can happen and appear on the results of your FAFSA. You'll see something called a comment code, or schools commonly refer to this as a C flag. The Department of Education compares FAFSA data to multiple federal databases. So they will check you with Social Security Administration, Selective Service database, Department of Homeland Security. Lots of federal databases are out there, and the FAFSA will do a check, an electronic check of the data you put on their FAFSA to make sure everything matches up. If your data does not match, like you said, for example, if you're a young man over the age of 18 and you said, I am registered for selective service, and then the selective service database says, no, this person is not registered for selective service yet, that's when you get one of these comment codes or C flags. And that's just another thing the schools have to review and resolve prior to dispersing federal student aid. At USciences, we will process you with an estimate, but it is contingent on us being able to resolve the C flag or the comment code. I already mentioned selective service. That is very, very common. I mean, so common for young men. If you don't know, when you turn 18, you are required to register with selective service. But the FAFSA does have an option that you can say, please send my information to selective service so they can register me. So that's a streamline right there. There are many times we'll get a citizenship mismatch. Pretty much anybody who is a naturalized citizen will get a citizenship mismatch. It's not that you did anything wrong or you're not eligible. If you're a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, you are eligible for federal student aid. We just have to collect copies of citizenship documents, excuse me. And the other common mismatch is Social Security number mismatches. Kind of like my son. He had one of those originally. So you do have to file the FAFSA every year. your eligibility could change from year to year. You know, you may have declined your aid one year, but you might want your aid the next year. You do have to do a FAFSA each year to be considered for federal student aid, and or at USciences for our own aid. Like I said, every school is a little bit different. It doesn't hurt you to do it, but if you know you're not going to take any loans and you're not eligible for any grants, you don't have to do it every year. But if you're interested, it is not a one and done thing. You do have to file it every year. So let's get further into some examples and some specifics on aid. So when we're processing financial aid, we are taking into account both direct and indirect costs as costs that may be covered by federal student aid as well as USciences aid and state aid. So all financial aid can cover direct and indirect costs. So examples of direct costs would be tuition and fees, of course, and room and board if you're an on-campus student. So what those are charges you receive directly from the school. Indirect costs are books and supplies, as long as it is not something the school sells you directly. Most schools, it is an indirect cost. Transportation and personal expenses are also indirect costs. They're something that you should budget for, and we do include that information on our financial aid award notification, but it is not paid directly to the school. So here at USciences, the starting point is always tuition and fees at every school. We have a fixed tuition program where when you start in your program, so for example, if you're a bachelor's degree student in, I don't know, my son, he's a physics major, so I'll use physics. If you're a bachelor's degree student in physics, you have a fixed tuition schedule for all of your years until you graduate. So we don't have yearly tuition increases. So from the time you start your first year, you know what your tuition will be. And we also have some direct entry professional programs. The schedule is a little bit different, but it is still a fixed schedule. And I think when I looked at the registrant list, there are some students here that are interested in direct entry professional programs. So I'll just explain a little bit about that. Professional years typically cost more. They're more lab intensive and hands-on experiential intensive. So there is a price difference there. But at USciences, we have what we call the undergraduate years and the professional years. So it is a fixed schedule, but they changes on during the professional years. So you can see the rest of the pricing for those direct entry programs. Now this may not seem like a big deal to you, but we instituted this, 3 or 4 years ago with our fixed tuition pricing schedule because so many of our students, the number one concern of theirs was increasing tuition every year. Most schools, if you don't have a child at another school already, you may not know this, but every year tuition and fees increase. So typically the average is around 4.5%, but it's anywhere between 3 and 7%. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start adding that on, and then the next year tuition goes up again, and it adds on to that new amount, it's kind of like compounding interest. So for USciences, we fixed it so you can plan out exactly what your financial plan needs to be for all of your years. We also have scholarships and grants. We have merit awards that are determined by the admissions office. Those are based on your academic performance in high school. If you do submit SATs or ACTs, they are optional for the coming year, but if you do submit those could be taken into account as well. We have legacy awards if your parent or grandparent or sibling has graduated from USciences. We have honors awards for students who are invited to participate and then commit and participate in the honors program here at USciences, which is pretty selective. It's only about 40 students a year, I think. We have athletic awards if you're interested in Division II athletics at the collegiate level. We do have athletic awards for all of our teams, and a full listing of those teams is out on our website. And the one thing that is based on the FAFSA and the information you submit is a housing grant. That is the form of need-based aid that we offer. The number one concern of most of our students was paying for housing. So that is the form of our need-based aid. Now, different schools will have different types of scholarships and grants available. Most private schools do have their own scholarships that they offer. Public schools, not as much, but they are starting to offer some scholarships as well. It's just not as common. And then some things you should consider. A few years ago when we went with the fixed tuition schedule, we also reduced our tuition. That brought our actual tuition more in line with the actual cost of having students in the program. Prior to that, our tuition was much higher. We reduced it, I think, over 40%. And our scholarships were equivalent to almost half of the tuition. So what that did was, you know, if our tuition and fees was about $40,000 and you got a scholarship offer of $20,000 a year, it sounded really, really great. But then once you subtracted that from our higher tuition, it was still a $20,000 net out of pocket. So my point is, I guess you have to really, when you get a scholarship offer, compare it to the actual price of tuition, because you really want to look at an apples to apples comparison of what the out-of-pocket expense is, because the scholarship letter alone can be very misleading, I guess. There are lots of spreadsheets out there to do this, and the admissions office, they are professionals at putting those together. Oh, wait, I skipped one, sorry. So need-based financial aid, in summary, I would just remind you that the FAFSA is required for all federal and state need-based aid, and also for most need-based aid at most schools. Our school code is 003353, and it's open. We send our earliest award notifications in January. Different schools are different, so check, you know, if you don't get notifications in January from another school, don't panic. It might not just be their time frame to send them out yet. So on the topic of need-based aid, I mentioned USciences has a housing grant that we offer that is need-based for students living on campus. There is still a federal Pell Grant. The federal Pell Grant has been around for a really long time. Really, really long. So it is increasing a little bit every year, the maximum. You do have to be financially eligible for that. You will not know until you submit your FAFSA. There is no one adjusted gross income of parents that, you know, I can say, you know, if your adjusted gross income is this number or less, you're definitely eligible. That number does not really exist. It really depends on that and a number of other factors, including the number of people in your household and how many people in your family are in college. State grants in Pennsylvania are, the maximum for this year was $45.24. That was a slight increase from the year before. Like I mentioned before, Pennsylvania has a very, very robust state grant program that can only be used in Pennsylvania. And that is also contingent on the cost of attendance or the cost of education at the school where you're going. So if you go to a state university in Pennsylvania, the amount is not that high. It's kind of prorated because the state is already funding that state university. So That is that is the amount for most private schools. State amounts are a little bit less. And we also have federal work study. That is a need-based award as well. It's a part-time job. You earn those funds in the form of a paycheck. It has not changed very much. I'm sure many parents out there had work study jobs. I had a work study job way back, and I was, this is kind of funny because I don't think this exists anymore. I'm not sure, maybe it does. I worked in the library, and my job was to work at the microfilm and microfiche counter. So when somebody needed to look up something on microfilm or microfiche, I was the person that went back and pulled it out of the stacks, the microfilm stacks basically, set it up on the special microfilm machine, and showed the students how to work it and help them if they had any problems. So students, ask your parents. If there are any students out here, ask your parents what that's all about. Prior to the internet. So is it the original electronic storage of data. Okay, federal loans. This is a big topic of conversation. Especially right now, the interest rate was just reduced for this current year to 2.75% for students. It is a fixed interest rate loan. Every year, rate is set based on current rates, the 10-month Treasury bill rate, and you keep that interest rate for that amount of the loan for the life of the loan. So this year's rate is great. It's 2.75%. Last year was, I want to say, around 4%. So it's been relatively low. When I was back in school, it was 8%, which sounds crazy now, but it was 8% way back. So it changes a little bit every year, but is basically the same as what used to be called the guaranteed student loan. I had a guaranteed student loan. The name has changed a little bit over the years, but it is still the same thing. It's a federal subsidized loan, does not accrue interest during the time you're in school, at least during the time you're in school, at least half time. Unsubsidized loans do accrue interest while you're in school. So most students have a combination of that. You do have to be financially eligible for the subsidized portion of the loan. However, even if you are not eligible for the subsidized portion, all students are eligible for the same maximum amount per year. Every first year freshman, as long as you meet the federal student aid requirements, are eligible to borrow up to $5,500 their first year. The maximum portion of that may be subsidized is $3,500, and that is based on the information on your FAFSA. We have students with combinations, all different combinations. Many students don't want the unsubsidized loan. It's totally okay to decline any or all parts of those loans that you're offered. Almost all schools are going to offer the maximum federal loans to you on their first financial aid award letter. Because they want you to know this is the maximum amount of loans you can borrow. Feel free to decline them if that's your family's position. In order to borrow federal loans, you really don't have to do anything yet, but next year, if you're a senior now and you're going to be a freshman in the 21-22 school year, you'll get requests from either USciences or whatever school you're attending to complete a master promissory note and entrance counseling. And there's one brand new item we have to add to this, which is called the annual student loan acknowledgement. But don't worry, we will walk you through it. There are some additional loan options as well. I don't know if anyone on here has ever had a federal Parent Plus loan for another child, but that loan program has also been around a pretty long time. This year's interest rate is 5.3%, so that's a reduction from last year. Parents apply on studentaid.gov. And you may be thinking that if you had a loan recently, that is not the same one that you've ever been on for loans. What the Department of Education did pretty recently is try to make studentaid.gov really an umbrella website for all the other federal websites. So what used to be studentloans.gov and all that functionality resides on studentaid.gov. FAFSA.gov resides on studentaid.gov. NSLDS for students, which is the National Student Loan Data System, that also resides on studentaid.gov. So it really is a one-stop shop for federal student aid. They did a really nice job organizing it, actually. I mean, they really did a great job organizing it. I don't mean to say it in a negative way because it's very streamlined. I think they did awesome. But anyway, back to loans. So if you don't want a federal Parent Plus loan for whatever reason, because the parent does have to be the borrower on a Parent Plus loan, the student cannot be the borrower, and this loan cannot ever be transferred to the student. For whatever reason, if you would like to look into the private education loans, that's fine too. We have a mix at USciences of about 50%, 50-50. About 50% of our families and students who take additional loans beyond the regular federal student loans do plus loans, about 50% do private education loans. So there really are pros and cons to both of those. We have a list of most commonly used lenders at USciences. You can link to it from our USciences financial aid page, but that will take you to elmselect.com. That's a nonprofit site that hosts lists for schools, and it's kind of a one-stop for all different education loans that are on the private sector. A couple reasons people might choose alternative loans instead of Parent Plus loans are you might get a better interest rate on the private loans. Plus loan, if you're approved for it, credit approved, the interest rate is 5.3% this year. If you have really great credit, you might be able to get a rate better than 5.3% through a private loan. Some parents don't have the ability to get a Parent Plus loan, or they don't want a Parent Plus loan. This private education loans let the student be the borrower. Students typically need a cosigner, which is normally the parent, but not always. It allows the student to be the borrower and maybe someone else to be a cosigner, like another relative or friend of the family, something like that. And the other positive on the private loans is there are usually no fees for most of them, where the plus loan does have a 4.2% origination fee. So that means for every, say, $10,000 borrowed, there's $420 that's taken off the top of the loan. So that's the fee, which is different than the interest rate. Most private loans do not have fees. That said, there are a lot of positives about the Federal Direct Parent Plus loan. It's a federal loan, so there are lots of repayment options. There are extended repayment options, graduated repayment options, income-driven repayment options. You don't have that with the private loans. If a parent has their own student loans, say that they're paying back, and they get a Federal Direct Parent Plus loan, they could consolidate that with their own student loans. So there are definitely pros and cons to both types of loans, and it's really every family situation is different. So we get asked a lot, what do you recommend? I can't recommend, what I would recommend or do myself is not necessarily what's going to work best for your family. So you just have to take all those kind of pros and cons and see where the puzzle pieces fit for your family's financial situation. That is if you're interested in loans. Many families do not take any extra loans. It's totally up to you how you want to work out tuition at our school or any other school. We offer a payment plan. Almost all schools offer a payment plan. You can use a payment plan at most schools in combination with any scholarships you have, any grants you have, any loans you have. We have some families, they figure out what what the payment plan could be because they want to minimize their loan debt, and then they just do a loan for the rest. That's pretty common. Some people borrow everything, some people don't borrow at all, some people only do payment plans, or you can always just make a payment each semester. We bill per semester, and most schools do bill per semester. So I put up some additional resources here for you, and I'll just tell you a little bit about them, and then we'll see if we have any questions in the chat. Fastweb.com is you've all probably heard of this. If your high school guidance counselors have any posters up in the guidance office, I'm sure they have a FastWeb poster. It's probably the gold standard of scholarship search engines. We recommend as much as possible, and now is the time to really start looking, and I understand for you seniors out there, it is hard work. But to search for private scholarships, and it can be so worth it if you follow through and get awarded scholarships, but you have to find them. So FastWeb is National Scholarship Search. Collegeboard.com also has a scholarship search engine on it. But really the most common scholarships we see are not the big national scholarships. They are typically more local, community-based foundational scholarships. Parents, employers, things through, you know, the high schools have scholarships. There are some local foundations, you know, every urban area kind of has a cluster of local foundations, and those will come up on FastWeb as well, but there's a lot to sort through when you do those national scholarship searches. So it depends on how much time you have, but I recommend it. Educationplanner.org is really great for high school students. It goes through a lot of different, you can put in scenarios, you can look for academic programs, what's a good fit for you, how to pay for it, what are average salaries after, is it worth it to borrow X amount based on, you know, your expected career, things like that. That is hosted by FIA, Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. However, even if you are out of state, it is a free and open website. You do not need to be a Pennsylvania resident to use Education Planner. Some other states may have them as well. I'm really only familiar with the Pennsylvania one, but it's a great tool, and it's open to everyone. And youcandealwithit.com is also hosted by FIA. It sounds like a little weird, and I actually had a student ask one time, well, that kind of sounds like a scam website. And it's not, actually. It was developed by FIA to provide tools for basically to help with loan repayment. So there are interest rate calculators, repayment calculators, you know, what if I pay the interest on my unsubsidized loan while I'm in school? How much will my loan payments decrease? All kinds of calculators at youcandealwithit.com. So that's also, even though hosted by FIA, open to everyone. So let me just, okay. So, you know, I work at USciences. I've been here for 5 years, and a little bit about me. I mean, I've been here as director for 5 years. A little bit about me, my son that I mentioned, who did his FAFSA incorrectly, is a physics major at USciences. He really loves it here. And I actually worked at USciences part-time about 5 years before coming here. Like, I was part-time and then I left for a full-time position, and I actually ended up coming back. It's such a great and supportive community. It's a small school, but as you know, we're in Philadelphia, so we have a lot of opportunities, and I was so happy when he decided to go to USciences, and you'll find out why in a moment. Proven value, like I mentioned before, we have the fixed tuition schedule. As long as you're here and you can leave for up to a year without your tuition schedule changing. So if you needed a leave of absence or something like that. But that tuition schedule has made things so much better for all of our students. We see it every day in the financial aid office. Well, now on Zoom with our financial aid clientele. We are ranked actually from the New York Times #1 in Pennsylvania and second out of almost 600 selected private schools for upward economic mobility. That means that the students that graduate from USciences are doing better than their parents' generation, which is so exciting. And this, I don't know why I was surprised, but it was really kind of a mind blower. Georgetown University did a study over a 40-year longitudinal study among graduates from different schools. And USciences is top 10 in the US for total return on investment 40 years after graduation among private four-year institutions. So this measures lifetime earnings, and we're #1 in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. So that says a little bit about what our students do and what they become. So we have questions. This is our actual aid office picture with Jana, who, if you come to USciences, I'm sure you will meet, and she will call you Hun every time you come in the office. So, Elise, do you have any questions?
Great, thank you so much, Pam. That was wonderful. So we did have a question that came through, and just a reminder for our participants, if you have questions, please feel free to submit those in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and we would love to answer those live for you. So we did have a question that came through, and the individual asked about outside scholarships. So I'm happy to answer that question. So we definitely do accept outside scholarship awards. If you are awarded an outside scholarship, the process for that would be for you to, generally the scholarship will be made out to University of the Sciences. So you would want to make sure that you provide the information to be able to get that scholarship award sent to University of the Sciences to be applied to your student account. Another part of that question was, is there a deadline for submitting those outside scholarships? And there's not really a deadline per se, and Pam, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I think generally you would just want to make sure that those scholarships are in before the fall semester begins, ideally, but at some point during the first couple of weeks of that fall semester.
Yeah, we do get scholarship checks all year long, so there is no deadline. Kind of you would, like Elise said, you would want to have them here within the first few weeks of the semester, before, like, due dates and things like that with student accounts. But we get the bulk of our scholarships kind of the last week in August and the first 2 weeks in September.
Perfect. Thanks, Pam. And then, from an admission counselor standpoint, one of the questions that I get frequently is, will I receive my financial aid package with my acceptance package? So that's a really great question. It's a very common question. And so the answer to that would be that you will, in your acceptance package, if you're awarded a merit scholarship, then you will receive that in your acceptance package. But you will receive your financial aid award separately. So that is going to be a separate mailing that you'll receive physically in the mail, and that will be sent, as Pam had mentioned, that will be sent starting in January. So if you apply early and get your application in early, we operate on a rolling admission policy. So the sooner you submit your application via the Common App or the other application venues that you may be applying through, if you're a transfer or graduate student, the sooner you submit that application, the sooner you'll be considered for your financial aid award. And for most students, for first year students especially, we'll start to send those starting in January. All right, so again, if you have questions, feel free to type those into the chat or the Q&A. And Pam, I think you just did that great of a job that you covered everything.
Oh, covered every single thing. If you are doing your FAFSA and you have questions, I actually should have put this in here, but there is a federal helpline. I think it's published on the FAFSA, but if there's something you just cannot figure out that is not in the pop-up help or anything on the website, you can call them at 1-800, the number 4, FED-AID, and there are operators there until 8 o'clock at night Eastern time. They are a little bit better equipped than the individual financial aid offices to advise on specific questions on the FAFSA. But like I mentioned during the presentation, it has been streamlined so much. And there's actually some skip logic in where it only asks you the questions you need to ask, and you don't, have to answer questions that don't really pertain to you a lot of times. So students are reporting to us that they're filling it out. They don't think it's faster and faster, but in reality, when they say, "Oh yeah, I did it Sunday night," it's like no big deal. Like it used to really be a big deal for them. So it's a lot better than it used to be.
Great. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to type those in the chat or the Q&A, and Pam and I will hang on for just another couple minutes here to answer those questions. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We hope that you got a lot out of our session, and we look forward to reviewing your applications, or your children's application, your students' application, as they go through the admission process. And then in the chat, you will also see 2 email addresses. If you have questions that you'd like to ask, any follow-up questions about the financial aid at USciences, or just in general, if you'd like to connect with our admission team, the email addresses for both the financial aid office and our admission team are in the chat as well. Oh, so we got a question in chat. So can you please say the helpline number again?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry. It's 1-800-4, the number 4, FED-AID. I think it's 433-3243.
And that's for Pam. I'm just putting that in the chat. That's for support for the
FAFSA itself. The number 4, FED-AID.
Okay, so I also put that in the chat as well for everyone to copy.
Yeah, but they do have field pop-up help within the FAFSA now that it's kind of advanced a little bit over the past few years. So hopefully you find you don't even need it, but if you do, it's there.
All right, so are there any additional questions? Anyone, if you have any questions, please again, feel free to use the Q&A feature or the chat feature, and we will answer those for you. And I can just, I guess, kind of a, kind of a send off here is that our financial aid team is a very friendly group of individuals. So if you have questions, please reach out to Pam and her team. They're more than happy to work with you. And they're, again, very, very friendly, approachable individuals. So they're very happy to work with you throughout your process and with any questions that you have.
Thanks, Elise. Yeah, prior to COVID, we always had a candy bowl, always. And we always had students stopping in to just talk, which is different than most aid offices. If you've ever been in an aid office, we had a couple students who would just sit in our lobby because it was quiet between classes and read, or a regular crew that would stop by for candy too. But unfortunately, due to COVID, all that's a little bit changed. We are open, but we have electronic appointments with financial aid counselors now, and probably most aid offices, it's a different world. It's a different world, and hopefully someday we'll get back to normal.
Definitely. All right, so it doesn't look like we're getting any additional questions from the chat or the Q&A, so I think we're going to go ahead and end this session. But again, thank you all so much for joining us today. And Pam, thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for attending.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.